first speaker this morning is Bill McNamara. Bill will be reflecting this morning on his experience on the morning of September 11th, 2001, when tragedy struck and he took away from those experiences. In this 6 to 8 minute speech entitled Remembering What We've Forgotten, please help me welcome Bill McNamara.
In 2001, I was an engineer fresh out of college working in New York City. And one Friday night, late in the summer, me and 3 of my friends decided to go out and get a beer after work. And somebody had a great idea that we would take a ride downtown. There was a great bar called Windows on the World. And we went up to Windows on the World, which was on the 106th and 107th floors of the North Tower. And we had a great time. And I remember being in the bathroom washing my hands, and there was a calendar on the wall. And it was talking about the bands that will be playing the next week and the week after and the week after. And there was no week after. That was September 7th, 2001. And I thought about it afterwards, like, if only I had known. Could I have said something or done something? Could I have helped somehow? From what I read afterwards, 72 people who worked in the Windows on the World lost their lives because when the plane hit the North Tower, all of the emergency stairwells were cut off and they couldn't get out. And I thought, if only I had known, could I have helped? On the actual morning of September 11th, I took the train into work every day. But on that day, my fiance, who was to be my wife less than a year later, was driving into Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center is on 68th Street on the west side, the Upper West Side. And she said, I'm driving into you, I'm gonna give you a ride. And I said, that would be great. So we drove in, we parked her car at Lincoln Center on 68th Street. I said goodbye to her. She went into class, she was going to Fordham for her graduate degree. And I got on the 1 train, which runs from the Bronx all the way down the west side, goes under Lincoln Center, goes under Times Square, which is where I worked, continues down, stops goes under the World Trade Center, and continues on to Brooklyn. So at 8:44 in the morning, when the first plane hit the towers, I was on the 1 train between Lincoln Center and Times Square. And obviously I didn't know it at the time, but all the lights in the subway went out, which happens from time to time. It's not exactly a welcomed event, but luckily the lights came back on. A few seconds later, it wasn't all that long. And I continued, I got off the subway in Times Square, and I went upstairs, and it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. There were people just standing in the middle of the street, like looking up. And at this time, most of Times Square is closed to car traffic, it's only pedestrian traffic. But at that time, Broadway, 42nd Street, and 7th Avenue all converge in Times Square, and there was a lot of traffic, but people were just standing in the middle of the street, and I was thinking, somebody's gonna get hit by a car. Like, what are you people doing? And everyone was looking up at the Jumbotron, and there was a movie or something on. There was a burning building on it. And I was walking to my building, and I didn't know what was going on. And I walked up, my building was right in Times Square, 1501 Broadway. And I went upstairs, and there was a big TV in the front of the office at the reception area. And most of the office was gathered around. And I came in and I said, what's going on? Somebody said, a plane hit one of the towers. They think it was an accident. It's horrible, look. And we were standing there, and I was watching at 9:03 when the second plane hit the second tower. It felt like, shock is the only word. And people use that word a lot, but it's the only time I can remember feeling like I couldn't breathe and I didn't know what to say. It clearly wasn't a mistake. And as we stood there watching, about 30 minutes later, they cut in and there was live footage from the Pentagon. The plane had crashed into the Pentagon. And then one of the receptionists came out and said, Bill, someone's trying to get you on the phone. And I went and I picked up the phone, and it was my dad. And he was like, why aren't you answering the phone? I said, I was watching the news. I said, I didn't know, because I had spent time downtown. I had worked at the World Financial Center just a a few weeks before. No, I'm fine. Everyone's fine. Hung up. And I went to my desk, and my fiance, soon to be my wife, called and said, the dean came in, all of school is closed, like, what should we do? Should we leave? And I said, I don't know. Nobody's leaving. And she said, well, if they're crashing planes into New York City, like, how long do you think before they get to Times Square? And I said, oh, that's a good point. She said, I'm walking down, I'll meet you, and then we'll go. So I talked to people at work. I said, nobody knew what to do. There was this sense of, should we be doing something? There was confusion. People were like, I mean, you can go if you want to. I was like, well, my fiance's coming, we're gonna go. Okay, we'll stay in touch. And I went downstairs and we went outside, and people were like wandering around in the streets. It was the strangest thing. And I met up with my fiance, Casey, who's now my wife. And we said, what should we do? And I said, we should give blood, right? There's probably people who are hurt. There's hospitals everywhere. And we walked to 8th Avenue to one of the hospitals there, and I went and I said, we'd like to give blood. And they said, that's wonderful, there's a 3-hour wait. And I said, oh, well, maybe we'll try somewhere else. And we wandered uptown. And there was people 8 deep at the phone booths. There were still phone booths back then. You couldn't get cell phone service because all of the cells were locked. So eventually we got back to Casey's car and we found out that all of Manhattan was closed. You couldn't get into the city. The trains were shut down, the tunnels were shut down, the bridges were shut down. But they were letting people out. So we got in Casey's car. We ended up speaking to her aunt and a different uncle and picked them up. And we drove north, up the west side. And we came to the toll booths at the Henry Hudson Bridge. And there was nobody coming south. But when we got to the toll booths, we sailed through. The gates were up. It said, be safe, no toll. And the cars were backed up for miles and miles and miles. People trying to get in. It was just a river of headlights, and it broke my heart. These were people standing outside of their cars crying. They were desperately trying to get into the city for someone they cared about. It was a really, really, really troubling time. But the thing that I remember most about that day is how everyone was looking for something to do, some way to help. And the days that followed, the messages that poured in from all over the country were messages of love and support, that we all stand together and all the petty differences fall away. And it was, how can we help? What can we do? I find the times we live in today to be very divisive and very upsetting. It seems that people use words like conservative and liberal as though they are horrible things, and we attack our fellow Americans as though they are truly the enemy. It makes me sad to think that it may take a tragedy or some sort of major thing like a major hurricane barreling down upon us to help us remember that we're all on the same team. We're all Americans. So on September 11th today, I ask you all to spread that word, to remember that we're all in this together. I'm Toastmaster.